Hello, my name is Paula Alvarez. I'm a doctoral student at Aspen University. This presentation is an assignment for my Doctoral Writing and Inquiry into Research class. The objectives for this presentation are to discuss the questions necessary to conduct a research study, institutional approval. There are two types of institutional approval. There's the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, which is required for doing research with human subjects. And there's the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee approval, which is required for doing research with non-human animals. We will discuss the benefits of pilot studies. We'll talk about the informed consent and methods for data collection. Finally, very briefly, we will talk about choosing a sample size, instruments, and methods. So almost every research study includes a research problem, a research question, the research plan, which is the actual data analysis and collection, and the implementation of the plan. So, as reported by Christensen, Johnson, and Turner, 2014, Kurlinger defined a research problem as an interrogative sentence or statement that asks what relation exists between two or more variables. In behavioral and social sciences, the problem statement should be included in the statement paragraph, and in the statement paragraph we also want to make that kind of inviting to the reader so they'll hopefully stay and read the entire study. We will explain the central focus of the study, the relevance of the study, and the benefits of researching the specific problem. According to the University of Southern California, there are 4 types of research problems in social science research. The casuist is basically looking at situations and based on a general set of rules determining right or wrong, ethics or moral dilemmas. Number 2, the difference research study compares differences between 2 or more variables. The descriptive research study basically describes a phenomenon and points out the importance of that phenomenon. And finally, the relational research study researches characteristics that are related and tries to find the common links that cause them to be related. The research question, which is abbreviated capital R, capital Q, is based on a topic of interest, of course. The researcher has to be very familiar with the current research on the topic, meaning that he or she must have done an exhaustive literature review, have talked to experts, and really know what the topic is. The researcher needs to have identified knowledge gaps in the current research. He needs to have a rationale for doing that research and for closing those research gaps. And he needs to determine whether the research gaps can be closed in only one study or more than one study needs to be completed. Hulley, Cummings, Browner, Grady, and Newman in 2006 made an acronym to help the researcher get started on his research study. The acronym is FINER, which stands for feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. When we're talking about feasibility, we're talking about the investment of time and money, and talking about finding the appropriate subjects for the study. These authors point out that many times researchers overproject the number of subjects from their pool who will actually complete the study. In order to determine that a study is interesting, the researcher needs to be talking to experts in the field, talking to colleagues, friends, to find out if there really is interest generated in that topic. Novel refers to the fact that we must be adding new information to the body of research that already exists. Ethical, of course, talks about each of our actions related to the research, from writing up the research, how we treat our subjects, how we present our materials. And relevancy refers to whether or not there's any importance of doing this particular study. This is talking about the research hypothesis and the null hypothesis. You can see that the research hypothesis is symbolized by the capital H and the subscript small a. The research hypothesis does not set any parameters for the expected change based on the manipulation of the independent variable. The null hypothesis, which is represented by the capital H and a subscript 0, actually sets the parameter by stating that there is no or zero relationship between the manipulation of the independent variable and the outcome of the dependent variable. The objective of a research study is to find out the answer to specific questions. Holley and his colleagues in 2006 developed a research plan component outline. These researchers suggest that at the onset of a research study, the researcher should write a brief one-page outline, and that outline should include the title of the study, the research question, the significance of the research, the study design, subjects, variables, and the statistical issues. I wanted to point out to you, this is the page of the website of the Health and Human Services for the Code of Federal Regulations 45, Part 46, which govern and guide institutional review board members on making a decision. The RRB can make a decision to approve, modify, or reject a proposal for research. This page is from the National Institutes of Health, and this is the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare. This is the page that guides the committees who make decisions on proposals for non-human animal use in research. There's a guide here that can be downloaded by the committee, which gives specific guidelines for how they would determine whether to approve, deny, or modify a research proposal. I thought it was interesting when we were reading about 3 types of rat species that are generally used in research, so I wanted to find out how a researcher would actually buy rats. I found Charles River is an organization that sells rats, and they do a lot of other things. They do a lot of research, and they publish research related to animal research and experimentation. But one of the 3 species that we read about is the Long Evans hooded rat, and this is a description of the rat. It was developed by researchers in 1915. In order to purchase any of these rats, the researcher must provide proof that he has committee approval for the non-human research prior to purchasing rats. So there are a number of ways to find human subjects for our research. Of course, the first thing we have to do, the researcher has to decide who will be included and excluded from the study. Generally, because of cost, we're looking at convenience, willingness, and availability for recruitment of subjects. Sometimes we go through agencies. For example, I want to do research with high school students, so I would need to, in addition to getting the IRB approval, I will need the agency approval from the school district and the actual high schools that I want to use to interview students. In addition, we can do internet searches for group members through open discussion groups. We can use Usenet groups, email lists, and there is a company that does survey sampling for us, and we just pay a fee for that. There are many benefits to the pilot study. So basically, a pilot study is a run-through of the actual study. So the researcher is going to find a few people to do a practice run of the research study. By doing this, the benefits include that the researcher can identify some of the problems maybe with the clarity of instructions. He can determine whether the independent variable manipulation is producing the intended effect. He has the opportunity to practice so that when he does it with his actual cohort of subjects, it will run smoothly. He can correct any procedural problems that are identified. He can correct browser problems or accessibility problems for disabled people, and he can verify that the data is being returned as planned. Informed consent is extremely important. Informed consent can be waived by the IRB in some situations. However, the researcher must apply for waiver of the informed consent. The informed consent must provide a description of the study, explain how long the participants can anticipate they will be involved in the study, and what they will be expected to do, what the procedures are. If there's any compensation, whether it's course credit or monetary compensation, that needs to be fully explained. Participants must be made aware that their participation is voluntary, that they can withdraw at any time without negative consequences, and if it's a survey, that they have the right not to answer some survey questions if they feel uncomfortable with the question. In social sciences and behavioral sciences, many times we are researching sensitive topics. If that is the case, we also need to make sure that we have referrals available for participants who might have a reaction to some of the sensitive information that was researched in the study. And of course, we also, at the end of the informed consent, will provide information for who the participant can contact for additional information about the study. Minors are not able to give informed consent. They can give assent. Therefore, the researcher will contact the parent or legal guardian, go over the informed consent, make sure the parent or guardian completely understands the informed consent, and if the parent agrees and signs the informed consent, then the researcher can contact the minor to ask whether or not he's interested in participating. If the minor, after being explained what the research study is about, is interested in participating, he can give his assent, which means, yes, I want to participate. So the methods of data collection for human subjects, it's very important that we follow data collection procedures the same way that we outlined it in our proposal to the IRB. And in addition to that guideline, we need to be aware that if we do not collect the data in the way we set up the research, then we may not get the intended results. When we're determining sample size, there are three factors to consider. It's the study design, the variability of the data, and the statistical procedure to follow. Power analysis. So basically, power is defined as the probability of rejecting a false null hypothesis. We will be studying power analysis next week, so I'm not going to go into that any further. There are a number of research instruments that can be used to measure the dependent variable, and these include psychological assessments, computer, stethoscope, recording devices, EEGs, CAT scans, PET scans, MRIs. There is a journal that is devoted completely to instruments and apparatus that can be used in research. The name of that is the Behavioral Research Methods Journal. The research methods, after the methods have been approved by the IRB, we follow them. The researcher has to know his procedures well enough, and part of the pilot study was to be sure that he knows how to do that. The researcher has to be prepared to greet his participants, manage his facial expressions, nonverbal cues, body language, Explain the informed consent and be sure that participants completely understand. He needs to provide clear instructions for the procedures that the participants are to follow. He needs to collect the data and, of course, to do the debriefing with the participants. So, in conclusion, we've gone over some questions necessary to conduct a research study. We've talked about institutional approval, and we briefly discussed how to choose a sample size, instrument, and methods. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.